Hey folks, today I'm setting up a cute little tank. It's actually kind of a smart, innovative little tank. I've been talking a lot about different versions of this over the past year or so, and I can't wait to show you. It's all coming up right after this. Hey YouTube, this is Pecktec, and I bought a giant Betta at Aquascaping, and he has been living very happily in my 5-gallon tank. And I decided maybe that was a bit small. I'd like to move him up a little bit. He hasn't seemed uncomfortable in there, and the algae hasn't gotten out of control or anything. But I just thought maybe it'd be neater to kind of give him more room to move around, make him less susceptible to the current. So my local fish store in town, the aquarium, does a customer appreciation day, and I usually do a video about that. And I picked up this tank last time. I just never got around to setting it up. It's a smaller tank, and I'm tending to kind of move away from smaller tanks, but uh, I thought that I'd make an exception in this case, just mainly because I want to try it out. The other thing I'm doing is I'm swapping out a 3-gallon tank I set up last year. The 3-gallon tank is literally almost the same aquarium. It's got a lot of the same features, the baffled back. In fact, let me tell you, this is the Cascade B 45 degrees. So the 45 degrees just means the glass is put together like this instead of like this, like you traditionally see. And it's got the baffled backs. What I like about this tank is it's got the dedicated space for the heater in the back with the baffle, so the water never really gets down below a certain point in there. It's got a huge amount of area for biological stuff that you might want to add. And it's got a pretty decent area for the pump, depending on different sizes of pumps. If you want a lot of flow, make maybe a river-style tank in this little thing, or perhaps just to put like a regular size pump. I'll be actually stealing the pump and the light from the 3-gallon because I think the light could do more. And I'm going to see how it goes with the light. I might eventually put a bigger light on there. But the pump I'm definitely going to steal because really, the Betta's not going to want a lot of flow anyway. I think it's important to have some flow, especially if you're going to do a planted tank, because you really want the water to kind of move around inside there. But you don't want it so much that the Betta is going to struggle a lot and have to fight the current a whole lot. Giving them a little bit of a current to swim in isn't a total bad thing. You just need to make sure, because they need exercise just like the rest of us too. And I think stagnant water, I don't know. I don't think that that's really the best for them. It's definitely important that they have a place of relief inside of there. So I'm going to try my best to make a nice little place for my big blue friend and kind of get it started and have him moved over eventually. For plants in this thing, I'm probably going to focus on Anubias, just because they seem to be real compatible with the Bettas, and they give them big leaves that they like to lay on, and they kind of will stretch out across them, and I think that's cool. They also do pretty good in kind of medium to low light, which is what they're going to get from the light I'm putting on there. I got some rocks that are kind of interesting. These are called woodstone, which is kind of interesting, and I think it's because I don't think this is actually like petrified wood. I think it just kind of looks similar to wood, although I don't know. I don't really see it. But they sold them in these like neat little boulders that I thought would be really interesting to work with. And I'm curious to see what it looks like when they're wet. I kind of took one and tested it out, kind of rinsed it off. And it just looks pretty red, which is a cool color. It'll be a little bit different than you'd normally see. But I've got all these cool boulders to kind of work with an aquascape in here. Some of them do have kind of a wood-like look to them, but I don't know. Most of these just look like rocks to me. I really do like the color of them, though. So I bought a pretty big box of those. I also have some other pieces of wood. I have some really old spider wood. Some that's still got some branches on it, and one that's like was in the tank for probably 10 or 15 years and it's already lost all its little twigs and branches. Yeah, I've got that boiling downstairs, and hopefully it's sinkable by the time I go to like lay it in here. I'll be using rocks around it and stuff, but yeah, that's always a danger if you can't get your wood to sink. It's pretty lousy Aquascape at the end when you go to fill it up and it just ploop. So if you're interested in this aquarium, I'll have a link in the description to the Seven Ports website. It's not an affiliate link or anything like that, but if you're interested in one, that's where you can find it. I'm doing a little something on the first layer where typically I would add something like fluorite or maybe a chunkier substrate to the bottom. I'm going to use Biomatrix live rock biological filter media, and it just looks like some little white gray pebbles. I'm going to be soaking them in Activate, which is a biological supplement to kind of get a cycle going. Along with all this, I'm going to be adding a beneficial bacteria from the old filter, the filter that's been running on the 3-gallon for a while. That'll be going into here. I probably won't throw the Betta in right away because I'm also using, for my primary substrate, I'm using Amazonia. I have some left over in this bag. I've got another bag downstairs, so I figure between the bag and this like quarter bag, I should have enough to do this thing. That particular substrate tends to leach ammonia and stuff like that, and I'm worried that the Betta and the ammonia that it leaches might be too much, so I'm going to let that go. Typically, when you add this, you add fish with it, so it has a continual source of bacteria to eat. I think the ammonia that leaches out of this would probably be enough to kind of keep that biological going, or kind of get it moving in the right direction at least. And then when I get back from the big fish deal, I can add my bigger fish or test the water and kind of see how it's doing, and either add some more of this or add some more filter media out of the 5-gallon as I add the bigger fish. But like with any new tank, I mean, you're going to spend your first few days kind of testing the water and seeing what's happening in there, because it can be hard to tell. You definitely can't just tell visually. Sometimes you can smell when it's gone bad, but it has to go really bad. Alright, so let's put our focus back here on the tank and we'll get to aquascaping. What's crazy is I've poured all that liquid in here and I don't see anything coming out from the sides of it. It's really absorbing it all and just like letting it soak in, which is really pretty cool. And on top of all this, I'm going to add Amazonia. Start up here so it doesn't push the rocks anywhere. I'll just kind of cover everything up and we'll see how thick it is. Oh no, that was quite a lot of Amazonia. That is probably more than enough to do this tank. You definitely want a certain thickness depending on like how heavily planted your tank's going to be. In fact, there's no reason to really use Amazonia if you're not doing a planted tank. But the Nubius and stuff like that, it can have some roots, but it's not so bad. And I want the option to add other things, but really you just need maybe a good inch or so. 1.5 inches, 2 inches will really help. The main reason I wanted to get it thick as I could is because I don't want those little rocks to show. Right now they're about 1/2 inch down underneath here. And, eventually over time that might come out or something like that. But I'm hoping that I can still keep that rock core and make it aesthetically pleasing on top, which to me is like a darker substrate. Alright, so this has been boiled and hopefully will stay down. It's still seeming a little floaty right now. It's got a real interesting shape to it right here, where it kind of sticks out, has this nice little hole and stuff. I'm gonna put that facing up, and I'm gonna work with something that's been working for me a lot lately, where I kind of build a knot and then I kind of work outwards. Although this knot's going to be a lot of rock work. Something else I'd like to do with this one is I'm going to be using some plants and the rocks from the 3-gallon, which is mostly dragonstone, but I'm going to kind of de-emphasize the shape of that rock since it's going to be so different by putting it in the back. So I'm going to sneak it in behind this wood so I can keep all the nice plants that are already rooted in and growing on it, but not have it be so contrasty with the wood that's, or the rocks that I'm about to put in there. I am attempting to salvage as much as I could from the other tank and the plants in there. It had quite a lot of plants. It's probably all those plants are going to encompass this this little corner here. Let's get some of this other stone going in here and kind of see where we can make some advantageous choices with our plants. I'm just going to start on this side and kind of work my way over. It's a little weird with the rocks kind of all being the same size, and I think that makes kind of an interesting visual. A lot of times what's good to do with this is just to play with it some, practice. It's usually, you know, I had these plants were attached to the rock, and I wanted to make sure I worked it in somewhere, but normally I would do this way before I put any plants in, just to kind of, so I could play with it some and really see what I want to do before putting a timer on it by putting something that needs to be kept wet on there. Whenever I do a hardscape too, I want to make sure that I've got room all the way around the aquarium to clean it, so I can get in there and clean the glass. So I do like to give myself a buffer zone, just in case I want to get in there and clean it. I'm kind of worried that I'm going to need to weigh this or wedge this piece of wood down, so I'm going to kind of make a little pile on this side. We'll see how that'll kind of help keep that down and where I want it to be. Some of these have like really interesting, some are kind of plain, and some of these have really interesting textured surfaces, and I want to kind of get those facing out. I also want to make sure that when I can, I want to try to match them so that they're kind of, if there's striations, they're kind of going the same direction, or that's a little harder to do with this than it is with, you know, rocks with actual lines in them and stuff. But there are some of these rocks that are just more interesting than the other ones. I'd like to emphasize those. And we're going to leave some open space here too for maybe plants in the future. You know, I might put some Monte Carlo in here, let it kind of carpet through, if it will. And or maybe something else that comes along. When I set up that 3-gallon, I had a lot of abuse in there, and it did pretty well. Well, some of it did. Some of it melted away, and some of it did pretty well. I want to add a bit of that back in here. Of course, all the ones that survived. And I'm going to mostly wedge them in here in these rocks and kind of soften those surfaces up a bit. I'm going to do the same thing with this little bits of Anubias. I have all these little tiny portions of Anubias. Just kind of get them wedged in these little rocks. This open space here too on the side might be nice for botanicals or other things that I want to add later. I have tons of these little tiny portions of Anubias, which will be good for really softening up this kind of rocky hardscape that's in here. If they grow and do really well, it'll be a good soft place for the Betta to rest when he doesn't feel like swimming around. Some of these portions I have are just really, really tiny, and I'm just kind of putting them wherever inside of here. Sometimes with enough like little small portions, you can kind of make up for not having like a really huge portion, or spread it out a little thinner. Maybe it all grows in a little bit better. Sadly, I don't remember exactly which buse this is. I tend to get a bunch of varieties, and there are a lot of varieties of buse. What I've been doing with that is trying not to bury the rhizome. I do try to get the roots in there, and I just get it up next to a rock, and it will grow into the rock pretty well. They get real sticky on these rocks if you can just kind of get them in there with it just the right way. I tend to treat it very similar to the Nubius in that, if I do bury a little bit of rhizome, it'll be just enough to kind of keep it into place, and I just will wedge it into a spot to hold it in. I don't like to use glue. I don't like to use glue or anything like that if I can help it. You're almost better off just pinching it in than you are gluing it down. But you can, with some clever stacking, find ways to get this to stay. Not this clever. Using super glue is okay to use, in your aquascape, but I find it not aesthetically pleasing because it leaves that white residue. There are things you can do to mitigate that, like you can add, you can crush up some substrate and put it on there to make it look better, but it never seems to work just right for me, so I just don't do it. Got a lot of buse. I'm just going to keep layering it in here and there on all these cracks. I got this sprayer recently, and I really like it. I think it's for hairspray, but man, it works great for this stuff. You can use it at an angle and upside down, and it doesn't get messed up. You can pump, and it kind of does this continuous spray. Look at that. Really cool. Of course, I've got the chlorinated water in here. And I'm just going to give all these plants and everything a good soak. Make sure they last through my aquascaping time. Clean the glass a little bit for you guys. So come in here and really take a look and see what we've done. I actually wasn't sure what I would have for plants with this when I started because all of this has been pulled out of that 3-gallon tank. And as you may have known, if you've been watching my videos, it hasn't been doing all that great. But the plants were a little healthier than I thought they would be. I see some dead leaves and some stuff like that I might trim out real quick before I finish. But for the most part, I've got a lot of good kind of starter plants that I've already become accustomed to being underwater. And hopefully that translates to a really good setup for this. I am going to add a couple more Anubias Nana Petite that I picked up at the store. But I'm just going to throw them in there too, just to kind of fill it in a little bit, make it a little less rocky, give the Betta some nice kind of soft places to land if he wants to rest in some of these areas. A couple of nice little tight little samples of this Anubias Nana Petite. I'm going to slide this right here next to some of the older ones that I had from the other tank. And really fill in this area. And as this grows, it can be transplanted and moved so it doesn't get too clogged up. But in the short term, we'll have a nice little grown-in bed of these things that kind of support each other. And look a little bit more grown in. It's kind of deep in there. It's kind of lost in there. I might move him out to the outside. All right. All right. I think that's it. That looks pretty good. I do have another piece of wood, and I thought about including that over here. It's going to add a little bit of interest to this. Give me a little bit of vertical shape in here. Let's see. Any luck, I might be able to wedge it in so it can help hold this branch down too. I've done at least 2 aquascapes on YouTube where I go to fill it up with water and suddenly things start popping up. And then you're like redoing it, putting rocks on top of it and stuff. I would have just started with a little bit of the rocks kind of squeezing onto this piece of wood. But I think it's cool. It kind of adds to the realism a little bit, in that usually these rocks, these vines would be growing through rocks and stuff like that out in nature. Well, it's a nice little knot of things that attach to wood, rhizome-based plants and stuff. So we got Buse. Unfortunately, I don't remember what kind of Buse. And this Anubias Petite, Anubias Nana Petite. Very cool plant. I use it a lot. Normally, I would just pull plants out of my other tanks and stuff, but I don't know. I don't have any going in there right now that I want to pull out. I kind of like them where they are. So I'm just kind of doing this. Give everything a good spray down with the water bottle here. God, I love this water bottle. It's awesome. It just works so well. It's cheap too. I think this was like, look at that. I think this was like $12. It's made for hairspray. There's a link in my Amazon affiliate page. I do benefit when you buy it, so if that bothers you, I guess don't go on the link, but you can find it there. Here's the brand. Okay, so my next step is to break down a 3-gallon tank and kind of put this into place. It is replacing it. It'll be sitting actually right next to where the Betta tank is now, so he can look at it, I guess, while he waits for it to fit. Who cares? So I'll be putting everything in it, but the heater I'll probably add later. I'm not sure if I'll take the heater out of his tank and use it, although I think it would probably work. Or I might get a little bit bigger heater and put it in there, since it's slightly larger. It's double the size of the other tank, and I don't know. It doesn't get tremendously cold up there, so I don't think it needs a lot of heat, but definitely could probably benefit from a bigger one, so I might add a bigger heater, but I don't have to do that right away. Another plant that this little 3-gallon had is this kind of amazing pothos that has actually done better than any of the other plants in this tank. Wow. It's got a pretty good root structure. I'll be taking that over to the new tank as well. Okay, so I've got the other tank put away and cleaned out and stuff. And I've put this in place. This is a light from the old tank. It's an Ashta 20, I believe. It's in my Amazon list if you want to see more about it. It's a fairly small light. Hopefully it'll be enough. I just want enough to kind of keep these Anubis and this Buse alive. I don't need a tremendous amount of light. I don't want to cause an algae bloom if I can. I've also added a fair amount of substrate. I've just kind of filled in some of the gaps of substrate that I'm hoping will even out once I put water in here. Some substrate from the old tank just to kind of be a little less wasteful with it. And also, you know, again, contribute to the good bacteria. If we can get bacteria growing in here really well, we won't have the algae problems that you would have in a new tank. We can avoid a lot of new tank issues if we can get a good bacterial load in there right off the bat. I've taken a lot of extra steps to try to get there with this tank. Alright, so I've got the filter media from the old tank. It looks like we've got a couple of sponges here and a bag with some Biohome Ultimate. That should still be good. This tank, the old tank, never really had a load on it, so I'm not sure how beneficial this bacteria, what bacteria is left in here will be. But I'm kind of putting the sponges in an advantageous way to sort of keep a lot of debris from kind of floating in here. I've got a lot more room than I need for this, so I'll probably add some more later, but I'm going to go and throw this in at the bottom, twist it up nice and tight so it doesn't come off. I'll go ahead and set that in there. The old tank had an absolutely huge thing of pothos, so I'm going to stick that right there in the filter compartment too, and just let it grow in there. I had it in the heater compartment before, but since I'm going to have the heater in there, I don't want it tangled up with all these vines. So I'm just going to stick it like this. And lastly, I've got this little pump. This tube's kind of questionable, but hopefully it'll work. Now for this tank, I wanted to kind of, one, keep the Betta from being in too much danger of jumping out, and also to help with the evaporation, which is terrible. So I've incorporated a glass lid. I did have this piece of glass cut. I just kind of measured out the area that I wanted, and I had this piece of glass cut. I added these clips. And these clips you can get on eBay or Amazon. I'll try to link in my Amazon links if I can find them again. I bought a lot of this a long time ago, and I actually filled this up a little bit too much. But I found a lot of this a long time ago when I was looking for a lid for the Fluval Flora. Not the new one that we have now, but the other one with the face, because I really wanted to put a lid on that. And on the Flora, I think I ended up just getting one that fit the entire top. And what I did is I've left a little bit of room here so that I could, feed the fish. A little gap here. And you will get some evaporation out of that, but you can already see just in a day of sitting here, all the water that's collected on top of this is really going to, it'll keep dust out of here. Well, I haven't dusted it yet, obviously. It'll keep dust out of here, but it'll also keep a fair amount of the water going inside or staying inside the tank and not floating out with the air. I still have open areas in the back. I just got this kind of sitting here to help me gauge the temperature. I've got some open areas in the back, and this is, I think that's really kind of interesting because it kind of gives you some opportunities maybe for some different things. I'd really like to eventually incorporate a bog filter into this one, or maybe the 3-gallon I just took down, and do something like this steampunk tank. I mean, I've got this perfect area where I can build things. I really need a 3D printer. I did a Kickstarter for a 3D printer, and I'm waiting on it, and then I could like really do these things that I've always imagined. Like I have a fairly uncomplicated thing in my head, but it just doesn't exist. And I'm not great at fabricating this sort of thing. That's something I could really benefit from learning, and I probably should do a little bit more of that. But I'm hoping with 3D printing I can do some stuff that's like really neat, and perhaps one day soon I'll be able to do that. These white rocks that you see around here, this is actually power sand, because in the last aquarium I had, I did an ADA setup with a bunch of ADA products, and I wanted to use some of the aqua soil from before, and when I scooped it out, I got a fair portion of the substrate, or the underlayer, which is this power sand. I sort of decided that I don't love this area. It's like a little bit too open. I kind of like it. It's okay, but on the side here, I'd like to add some botanicals and really fill in some of the spaces in between and make it look really neat. And so I'm not going to worry about this white stuff in there too bad right now. Now, usually with this setup, I get to where I don't like the black so much. Like it's a little bit too much. Sometimes it's okay because it can make this even more of a focal point. Other times I like to kind of soften that by adding this brown, like this cheapo kind of brown aquarium gravel across the top, just to kind of fill it in and make it look, a little less stark in there. But what I'm going to do this time, I think, is I'm going to go pick out some botanicals and see if I can do it with that instead, and go from there. Okay, so let's take a look inside my botanicals box and see if we can find some cool stuff to add to that. I've got a little bit left over. I'll tell you, I bought this Enigma pack from Tannins, and it's gone a long way. I keep pulling little bits and pieces of it out and using it for different products, and I've still got quite a bit left. Of course, every month I get some stuff from my aquarium box, and they've been sending me a lot of botanicals, and I've used them in a lot of different projects. They're starting to build up, though. I really like these. I wish they would include a label so I could remember later on what things are what. I definitely am not going to go back through my videos and figure it out. And I'm not, botanically inclined enough to remember what all these are. I think really of the stuff that I've gotten, I like these things the most. They're really, really cool. What's funny is they would look great if they would just, they would look great if they would stay like this, but unfortunately when you boil them, they'll shut. That one's pretty wide open, so maybe it'll be open a little bit, but when you boil these up to get them ready, this usually seals back shut. Yeah, so I got a couple of these I can add. I've got this thing, which is really, really neat looking. It might be kind of big. I'm going to boil one up anyway. I'll just take the smaller one. I've been curious about these. These are basically, they look like beehives. And they feel really light like a beehive too. Just like a beehive you'd imagine. Some sort of seed pod. Very interesting looking. With the botanicals, I tend to go for texture and stuff. These banana bits are good too, these banana stems. They get real mushy though. They get kind of mushy, but they have a neat, sort of a neat texture to them, so I might throw a couple of these in. Really what I go for with this sort of thing is just sort of an eclectic mix of stuff. I'm not so down with the pine cones. These are a bunch of little tiny pine cones. I'm sorry it's kind of dark and hard to see in here. Yeah, more pine cones. Got some leaves. I think these are almond leaves. I've got a bunch of different sizes. I've got like big almond leaves and little ones. More pine cones. I'll probably give a bag of pine cones away at the big fish deal. If you go, come find me for free pine cones. We got some of these pods are really neat. Kind of a medium. Now again, these are very hard when compared to some of the other ones. I want to take this little one. I'll throw it in. And I'm going to take a handful of these little leaves and add them too. In fact, what I might do, I might just make myself a little variety pack in this bag. It's a good way to do this. Like, if you start collecting botanicals, just put them all in one place, and you can kind of go in here and go shopping for what you might want for a project. That's what I do. It seems nutty at first. I mean, I've been getting these things for months and months and months and not using them, but then all of a sudden you'll want to do something in here, and it's good to have a variety of things. Look at that. That's kind of neat. I think that's a banana. Piece of banana. It's a little too big though. You get some smaller. I think that's coconut. Some coconut shells. Some seed pods. Whatever that is. I can't remember now. We got a couple of those. And a couple of different shaped leaves. Alright. Throwing all that in the bag together. And that will be more than enough. In fact, that'll probably be overkill for the little areas that I've got. But I'm going to boil them all up anyway, and what I don't put in there, maybe I'll put in some other tanks. That's another thing too, is these things, they degrade over time. So you're going to want to occasionally get, oh, those are neat too. You'll want to occasionally get back in your box and pull some more out and replace the ones that have deteriorated away. Okay, that's it for this time. Let's boil them up and see how it looks. Okay, so it's been a couple of days, and while the water seems really clear, the glass is kind of messy in some spots where I was filling it up. And I haven't opened it up to clean the glass yet or anything like that. I'm going to do that in just a second, but this is what it looks like prior to adding some botanicals. And here's a little buffet of botanicals I prepared to throw inside there. And I'm going to go ahead and drop those in now. I love the look of botanicals, but I don't want the water to go completely brown. If it does it a little bit, that's fine. I want to make sure some of these more interesting shapes kind of end up towards the front. These other more basic ones just kind of fill in around the sides. Especially repeats of things I've already thrown in. Also don't want it to seem like too purposeful, like delicately placed. You know, I like it to kind of fall and kind of end up where it's going to be. Things will move around a little bit too as the current churns things up. I like sort of a random, that feeling that it's sort of a random placement. Though that being said, I want it to cover it in a certain way too, so not overly random, just a little bit. Of course, you know, nothing in your aquarium is really random. It's all gonna be kind of engineered by you to look the way you want. I'll put you back over here. Really, my hope is to... There are some benefits that I think will be great from this. Of course, I'm boiling out a lot of that. If you want black water, there's all kinds of beneficial reasons to have black water besides it just looking pretty. I tend to go for the more decorative reasons. And I know that that's, you know, not always the best reasons, you know, just because it looks neat. But it sure doesn't hurt to kind of have that as a goal, if that's what your goal. I mean, a lot of the reasons I started keeping plants were more because of their, you know, the way they looked. I thought it looked a lot nicer, and it was neat to have a natural looking aquarium, more so than I thought, you know, oh, this will really help out the inside. But it all goes together, you know. If it looks pretty and it helps, then that's, you know, that's bonus. I don't know anybody that would go to the trouble, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes a planted tank is a bit of trouble. I don't know anybody that would go to that trouble exclusively for, you know, just because it's pretty or just because it helps. Because it helps a little bit. It doesn't do all the work by any means. You still need to do water changes and stuff. Maybe less often. I think that's fair to say, but not always. That's not always the case. I mean, sometimes you're still going to have a bit of work to do, especially in the beginning, because these things don't just kind of settle in and go okay. It takes a little bit of effort to really get it right. Alright, I've got just a tiny bit of leaves here and a little bit of space left, so I'm going to see if I can get these towards the back. To kind of fall back there. I'm just kind of tossing stuff in, letting it land where it wants to, and then encouraging it where I would like it to be. Whoop, not to plant loose. I want it to look natural and Like things just kind of accumulated on their own. I also don't want to hide the really interesting ones that I have here. I want to put them where these different textures and shapes are kind of on top and not covered with leaves. I like for the leaves that are in here to be more or less the background. Something that you see under these interesting shapes and textures and stuff. And that's about it for this week. I'm going to go ahead and stop it here. We'll come back in a couple of weeks and I'll fill you in on how this tank is doing. I'm going to keep doing water tests and kind of just checking it out, make sure it's okay before I move the big guy from over here to over here. And what am I going to do with this tank? Well, I'm not sure yet. I might put a small species that I want to observe that needs to be kept alone, or I'd like to get some different kinds of shrimp. I've got some orange shrimp and I've got like tons of cherry red shrimp. Maybe I'll try something else that needs to be separated and I'll put it in there. After I move the big guy out, I'll more than likely take a female guppy or one of my endlers or something like that, and I'll throw it in there just to kind of keep the cycle going and make sure it stays appropriately biologically active. I'll be back real soon with some more videos. Be sure to subscribe and check out my old content if you haven't seen it. I've got years and years of content. If you're new and you're just coming to check me out, I really appreciate it if you hit a sub, hit a like, and kind of help me out with that algorithm. But until we meet again, follow your bliss, keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. But I'll be back real soon with... So what I'm doing today, and so back in the summer, so I can really benefit from learning, and I'm not great at fabricating. And I'll see you soon. Until next time, follow your bliss, keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. See you soon a lot.